They thought I was alone. No counsel, no allies, no platform. I could feel it the moment I stepped into that hearing chamber. The subtle shift in the air, the way conversations softened just enough to make room for quiet judgment. A few heads turned, then lingered a second too long. Not curious, not concerned, just certain. Certain they already knew who I was, or more precisely what I wasn't. My father didn't even try to hide his smile. "Can't afford proper representation," he said loud enough for the row behind him to hear. "That's really something." A few people chuckled, soft, polite, controlled, the kind of laughter that doesn't draw attention to itself, but still lands exactly where it's meant to. I didn't respond because I knew something they didn't, and in less than an hour, everyone in that room would too. The hearing chamber smelled faintly of polished marble and aged ink, the kind of place where decisions linger longer than voices. I stood near the respondent's table, hands loosely clasped in front of me, posture straight without effort. Across the aisle, my family occupied their side like they owned the room. My father sat at the center in a charcoal suit, tailored to perfection. His posture relaxed in a way that suggested confidence not earned today, but practiced over years of getting what he wanted. My mother sat beside him, a delicate silver pendant resting at her collarbone, her lips pressed into a thin line that could have passed for composure if you didn't know her well. I did. That line meant she was pleased. To their right, my brother leaned back in his chair, one ankle resting on the opposite knee, his gaze flicking toward me briefly before drifting away again, as if I were no more than a passing inconvenience. Their advocate stood nearby, flipping through a thick binder, occasionally exchanging quiet remarks with my father. Prepared, organized, comfortable, everything I wasn't supposed to be. I could still hear my father's voice echoing in my head. "Can't afford proper representation." He hadn't asked. He had assumed, and the room had agreed. I shifted my weight slightly, letting my eyes move across the chamber without urgency. The adjudicator's bench remained empty for now, but the clerk was already in place, organizing documents with practiced efficiency. A couple sat quietly behind me, whispering to each other. Somewhere near the back, a pen clicked in a steady, nervous rhythm. Normal sounds, ordinary, but beneath it all, there was tension. Thin, almost invisible, like a wire stretched too tight. "Still time to reconsider," my father said, his voice lower now, though no less sharp. "You don't have to embarrass yourself like this." I turned my head just enough to meet his eyes. There it was again. That certainty, the quiet belief that he understood the outcome before the first word had even been spoken. "I'm not embarrassed," I said calmly. My mother let out a small, dismissive breath. "Of course you aren't," she murmured almost to herself. My brother smirked. Their advocate glanced at me briefly, then leaned toward my father. "We'll keep this straightforward," he said. "Given her situation, I don't anticipate complications." I caught the hesitation before the word situation, the subtle adjustment, the polite substitution. It almost made me smile, almost. I looked down at the file in my hands. It wasn't thick, not like theirs. No color-coded tabs, no stacks of exhibits, just a clean folder, neatly organized, every page exactly where it needed to be. They thought that meant I was unprepared. They thought wrong. The bailiff stepped forward, his voice cutting cleanly through the room. "All rise." Chairs shifted. Conversations died instantly. The adjudicator entered with measured steps, his expression unreadable, eyes scanning the room with quiet authority. We all stood until he took his seat, then sat again at his signal. "Case number 47 to 218, the clerk announced. "Petition regarding estate distribution and contested ownership." Estate ownership. Words that sounded clinical on paper, clean, simple. They never were. The adjudicator adjusted his glasses, glancing briefly at the documents in front of him before looking up. His gaze moved from my family's side of the room to mine, lingering just a fraction longer than expected. "Counsel," he said, nodding toward my family's advocate. The man stood immediately, confidence radiating from him as he stepped forward. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward matter. My clients seek to resolve a dispute concerning property that was quite clearly never intended to be held by the respondent." He gestured toward me without looking. "The respondent," he continued, "has no legal representation, which unfortunately limits the efficiency of these proceedings, but we will do our best to keep things clear and concise." A few faint nods from the gallery. Agreement. "Of course, very well," the adjudicator said, his tone neutral. "We'll proceed." The advocate began outlining their case states, signatures, transfers of ownership. His voice was smooth, practiced, each sentence landing exactly where it was meant to. On paper, it sounded convincing, structured, logical. If you didn't know what to listen for, I stood still, listening carefully, not interrupting, not reacting. My fingers rested lightly against the edge of my folder, feeling the texture of the paper beneath them. Every claim he made, I followed. Every omission I noted. Every assumption I stored away, because assumptions were where people made mistakes, and mistakes were where cases turned. At one point, the advocate paused, glancing briefly in my direction before continuing. Given the absence of any substantive counterargument from the respondent, we believe the tribunal will find in favor of my clients without difficulty. There it was again. Absence. Silence mistaken for weakness. The adjudicator's gaze shifted toward me. "You'll have an opportunity to respond," he said evenly. I nodded once. "Yes, Your Honor." My father leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly, as if the outcome had already been decided. My mother adjusted her pendant, her movements precise, controlled. My brother didn't even bother looking at me this time. They were already moving on, already done. I let my eyes drift briefly to the adjudicator, then back to the documents in my hands. The room felt smaller now, the air heavier, not suffocating, just focused, like everything was narrowing toward a single point toward me. Good. I closed the folder gently, the soft sound of paper meeting paper barely audible. But it was enough because for the first time since I had walked into that room, my father's gaze shifted again. Not confident, not dismissive, just curious. It was subtle, but it was there, and that was all I needed. I lifted my head, meeting the adjudicator's eyes, as the advocate finished his opening. "No further statements at this time, Your Honor." A brief pause. Then the adjudicator turned to me. "Whenever you're ready." I took a breath, not deep, not dramatic, just enough. Then I stepped forward. "Thank you, Your Honor," I said, and for the first time that morning, the room went completely still. I didn't start with an argument. I didn't raise my voice, didn't rush to contradict anything their advocate had just said. Instead, I let a small silence settle first, not long enough to seem uncertain, just long enough to shift the rhythm of the room. It was a technique I'd learned years ago, though not here. Silence used correctly forces people to listen. "My name is Lysandra Thorne," I said, steady and clear, "and I'll be representing myself today." No reaction from my family. They had already dismissed that fact. The adjudicator nodded once. "Go ahead, Miss Thorne." I glanced briefly at the documents in my hand, then back up. Before addressing the claims presented, I'd like to clarify a few points regarding the nature of this dispute. Their advocate adjusted his stance slightly, preparing to interrupt. I could see it in the way his shoulders shifted, the way his fingers tightened around his pen. He expected confusion, hesitation. He didn't get either. "This is not simply a disagreement over property," I continued. "It's a question of intent, control, and the timeline of ownership decisions made prior to my departure from my family's residence." My father let out a quiet, impatient breath. Departure. That was a generous way of putting it. I could feel the past pressing at the edges of my mind, not as a flood, but as fragments, controlled, contained, because I didn't need to relive it. I just needed to use it. I was 19 the day I left. No dramatic fight, no shouting, just a conversation that ended in a kind of silence I hadn't understood at the time. The kind that doesn't ask you to stay. "You're making a mistake," my father had said, not looking up from the report in his hands. "I'm making a choice," I had replied. He turned the page. That was the end of it. My mother didn't argue. She didn't plead. She simply watched me pack, her expression unreadable, as if she were observing something inevitable rather than preventable. My brother had laughed. "Military," he said, leaning against the doorway. "That's where people go when they don't have options." I didn't answer him because at the time, I wasn't entirely sure he was wrong. Back in the hearing chamber, I shifted my weight slightly, grounding myself in the present. "My family's claim," I said, "is based on the assumption that I relinquished my interest in the property when I left." Their advocate nodded immediately. "That is correct, Your Honor. The respondent's departure was voluntary, and no further claim was made for several years." I let him finish. Then I tilted my head slightly. "Voluntary," I repeated. "That's an interesting choice of words." A flicker of irritation crossed his face. The adjudicator leaned forward just a fraction. "Clarify." I nodded. "At the time of my departure, I was given two options: remain under conditions that restricted my autonomy, or leave without financial support. Without access to family-held assets, and without any expectation of return. My mother shifted in her seat, subtle but noticeable. "That is not coercion in the legal sense," the advocate interjected quickly. "It was a familial disagreement." "Perhaps," I said calmly, "but it is relevant to the context of intent." He opened his mouth again, then closed it because he didn't have a clean way to counter that. Not yet. I could feel the room adjusting. It wasn't obvious. No one spoke. No one moved in any significant way, but the energy had changed just enough to register. The quiet certainty that had filled the space earlier was no longer as solid. Doubt had a way of doing that, I continued. My voice even. Following my departure, I received no communication from my family regarding the property in question for a period of 7 years. The adjudicator's pen paused. 7 years was not a small detail. During that time, I added, I was not asked to sign any documents relinquishing ownership. I was not informed of any transfer. I was not contacted regarding any legal changes. "That's because," my father said, suddenly unable to hold back any longer, "you made it clear you didn't want anything to do with us." His voice carried across the chamber, sharper than he intended. The adjudicator's eyes flicked toward him briefly. "Sir, you'll have your opportunity." My father leaned back again, jaw tightening. I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. 7 years. They had said it like it proved something, like time erased responsibility, like silence meant consent. But time didn't erase intent. It revealed it. I returned, I said, bringing the focus back where it belonged, only after being notified of a pending sale involving the property, which again, Your Honor, their advocate said, occurred well after any reasonable expectation of claim. After I was excluded from all communication regarding that property, I said, not raising my voice, but not yielding the floor either. He stopped. Not because I overpowered him, because I didn't need to. The adjudicator glanced between us, then made a small note on the document in front of him. That was the second shift. Small, quiet, but real. I adjusted the folder in my hands, opening it just enough to slide a single document free. I didn't present it yet. Not immediately. Timing mattered. Everything here was about timing. I understand the assumption being made, I said, that I left and therefore gave up any claim, that I remained silent and therefore consented to whatever decisions were made in my absence. I let that settle, then added, but assumptions are not evidence. The words landed cleanly. No emphasis needed, no dramatics, just fact. Their advocate inhaled slowly, recalibrating. I could see him working through it, adjusting his strategy, searching for a way to regain control of the narrative. He would try to push harder now, narrow the argument, reduce it to something simpler, predictable. Your Honor, he said, stepping forward again, even if we entertain the respondent's interpretation, the lack of action over such an extended period does not constitute legal abandonment without formal documentation. I finished the sentence for him. He stopped mid-sentence just for a second, but it was enough because now the interruption wasn't emotional. It was precise. The adjudicator looked up, really looked this time, not at my documents, at me, and in that brief moment I saw it. Not recognition, not yet, but interest, focused, measured. I lowered my gaze slightly, as if unaware of the shift, though every part of me registered it, because this was where things began to change, not in one dramatic moment, but in small fractures, hairline cracks in certainty. My intention, I said, is not to complicate these proceedings. A faint, almost ironic pause, only to ensure that they are accurate. The adjudicator leaned back slightly in his chair, fingers resting together. Proceed, he said, and for the first time since the hearing began, it didn't feel like I was the one on the defensive anymore. The shift didn't announce itself. No one in that chamber sat up suddenly or gasped or exchanged dramatic looks. It was quieter than that, more precise, like a weight being redistributed across the room, subtle but unmistakable, once you felt it. Their advocate felt it. I saw it in the way he adjusted his stance, no longer leaning comfortably into his argument, but standing straighter now, more deliberate. His confidence hadn't disappeared, but it had narrowed, focused. Good. That meant he was thinking. That meant he was no longer certain. The rest of the hearing unfolded with the same measured precision, the same careful dismantling of assumptions, the same quiet revelations through documents and timeline until the adjudicator delivered the ruling in favor of the respondent. The family's faces reflected the same stunned recalibration, the same late recognition. I gathered my documents with steady hands and walked out into the open corridor, carrying nothing that didn't belong to me. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever had someone decide who you are without ever really seeing you, then you understand this moment.